Welcome to reInvent session PNU 306 from AWS Power and Utilities. My name is Mary Wilson, and I'm a worldwide partner lead here at AWS. And it is my pleasure to introduce today's session from Alexandra Coleman, Head of Optimization for Centrica Business Solutions, a division of Centrica, an international energy company and a long-standing AWS customer. Before I hand over to Alexandra, a brief update on AWS Power and Utilities. We continue to see the 3Ds, decarbonization, decentralization, and digitization, seen down the left here on this graphic, as the main drivers for our utility customers as they accelerate their cloud journeys. Decarbonization and net zero goals across the globe are more urgent than ever, and we have seen the sense of urgency for these objectives coming out of the recent COP26 conference. The energy transition, as we move away from fossil fuels to cleaner energy sources, such as solar, wind, and storage, is accelerating. This energy system transformation drives the need for flexibility and for diversity of supply across the entire energy value chain. In some cases, resources are needed to balance the grid to meet reliability objectives. Consider the projections that the energy transition will present. A future where instead of having a few large bulk power plants, we'll have hundreds or even thousands of flexible generation assets built with a diverse mix of renewable energy sources. And in the near future, this will include electric vehicle to grid scenarios. And all of this will require investments in grid modernization and an increased focus on engaging energy consumers, which means more data to analyze, the need for sensors, IoT, and artificial intelligence machine learning. The 5 industry solution areas or categories are shown in orange across the top of this graphic. These are where we see our customers and partners driving business outcomes. The areas are IT transformation, OT transformation, asset and work optimization, customer engagement, and our increasingly focused solution area for energy transition. At AWS, we're taking a blue sky approach to help customers and partners wherever they sit in their energy transition and sustainability journeys. We're committed to helping accelerate innovation and to share the solutions that are working. For example, this past year, we've celebrated the success of customers such as Portland General Electric, who joined the Climate Pledge. We've shared the successes of customers including Engie, EDF, and Octopus Energy, who have led the way on energy transition innovations. We've also highlighted the success of partners including Accenture and Net2Grid, who have built solutions leveraging our meter data analytics Quick Start launched before reInvent 2020. And we've seen that when consumers are engaged in convenient ways that matter to them, they become more empowered and active in support of energy efficiency, water conservation, and ultimately support for the energy transition. We also know that to secure gains in customer engagement and trust, utilities must continue to make consumer data privacy and energy system security top priorities. For the purpose of definition, Wood Mackenzie research defines energy transition as, and I quote, a transformational switch away from fossil fuels and into renewable and clean sources of energy, solar, wind, and water, including more efficient use of energy using technologies such as LEDs, compact fluorescent lights, smart thermostats and appliances, and biofuels, end quote. What is clear is that this definition suggests a role for virtually everybody working together on the energy transition, not just large organizations, but all people and stakeholders around the world. This slide graphic from the 2020 International Energy Administration report, Net Zero by 2050, illustrates the major changes in energy that must occur to meet decarbonization goals. IEA calls for governments to provide credible step-by-step plans to reach their net zero goals, building confidence among investors, industry, citizens, and other countries. And for governments to put in place long-term policy frameworks to allow all branches of government and stakeholders to plan for change and facilitate this transition. The IEA report also lays out the role that technology will play, outlining more than 400 sector and technology milestones to meet carbon net zero by 2050. The report notes that to meet energy transition goals, major investments in electricity generation, network infrastructure, and in-use sectors will be required. For example, IEA calls out the following major investments. Annual investment in transmission and distribution grids expanding from $260 billion today to $820 billion in 2030. The number of public charging points for electric vehicles rising from around 1 million today to 40 million in 2030, requiring annual investment of almost $90 billion in 2030. Annual battery production for electric vehicles leaping from 160 gigawatt hours today to 6,600 gigawatt hours in 2030, the equivalent of adding almost 20 gigafactories twice each year for the next 10 years. And a rollout of hydrogen and carbon capture utilization and storage beyond 2030 means laying the groundwork now. Annual investment in pipelines and infrastructure increasing from $1 billion today to around $40 billion in 2030. So that brings us back to today and some of the energy transition use cases we'll hear about today. We'll hear how Centrica has used AWS to build energy transition solutions to manage, integrate, and economically dispatch virtual power plants, as well as distributed energy sources through a DERM solutions approach. This speaks to our session titled Balancing the Grid, which gives a nod to the complexity utilities face in managing an increasing mix of often decentralized resources. And this also speaks to Centrica's success in creating flexibility with solutions to help meet its sustainability and energy transition goals. Important to note that Centrica Business Solutions also delivers on these transformations for other utilities and energy customers as well. So Alexandra, thank you for joining us, and please take it away.
Thank you, Mary, for the introduction and the invitation to speak here at reInvent today. I'm Alex Coleman. It is a pleasure to be here, and I am thrilled to share what Centrica is doing to contribute to the energy transition, which you clearly outlined for our audience here. Today, I will first briefly introduce Centrica for those of you who are not familiar with us, and then we'll discuss our sustainability plan and how technology is enabling the energy transition. Centrica is an international energy services and solutions company. We are a utility with residential and business customers and operate across the energy sector, from power generation to supply. Centrica has always been at the forefront of the energy transition, and as the current landscape is focused on a carbon neutral planet, we are enabling colleagues and customers to use energy more efficiently and sustainably. Centrica is the oldest utility on the planet, dating back to the early 1800s when the UK was deploying the innovation at the time, which was gas streetlights. The 1800s were a defining time for the way that people interacted with energy and how it was distributed. Centrica played an integral role throughout the Industrial Revolution, including integration of all technologies we are familiar with today, from metering, which enabled customers to pay for and monitor energy usage, to the technology that brings us hot showers, which I'm sure none of us would be happy to live without, domestic hot water heaters. Interestingly enough, we are at another pivotal moment, powered this time by the digital revolution. As the owner of British Gas, one of the leading energy companies in the United Kingdom, you can imagine that sustainability has been impactful on our business since the introduction of the Clean Air Act, which boosted the use of gas fires for heating as an alternative to oil. Now, in 2021, we sit here understanding that there are even cleaner and more efficient ways to heat homes, potentially even with hydrogen. Centrica is at the forefront of this change. Given I'm located in New York, I'd be remiss to mention how Centrica entered the US, which via the acquisition of Direct Energy in 2000, and since then exited the commodity side of the business, but has maintained and grown the energy solution side of the business focused on commercial, industrial, and municipal customers. Which brings me to the Centrica of the 21st century. We believe that the climate solution will be dependent on people, and therefore we have a plan centered around people and the planet. Our employees and our customers underpin the commitments that we have made, which include equity and inclusion and tangible carbon goals. We are not just thinking about the climate crisis, but we have put forward tangible carbon goals for our employees by 2030, for our business by 2045, and for our customers by 2050. The goals will be achieved by supporting our communities, our planet, and most importantly, each other. Specifically on the planet side of the equation, our business commits to building a zero-emissions vehicular fleet by 2025, reducing emissions by 50% by 2030, building and owning 800 megawatts of renewable energy assets by 2025, and exiting the oil and gas exploration and production business while exploring hydrogen and other innovative solutions. In 2020, we made good strides towards our emissions reductions goal, cutting total carbon emissions by 18%. And while much of this reduction was a result of reduced activity during the lockdown, we were still able to progress carbon-saving initiatives, such as placing the UK's largest order of electric vans. Arguably more importantly is enabling all of our customers who are users of energy to take action to reduce their carbon intensity. Specifically, we commit to deploying millions more smart metering and energy management devices, installing low carbon technologies, and deploying more energy efficiency measures to reduce consumption, and for the electrons that are still consumed, supplying them from more renewable sources. All of this is underpinned by humans, our customers, employees, suppliers, and communities, and the plan will take all of us to be successful. We are also committed to our workforce representing the people and communities that we serve, and we have strong diversity ambitions to achieve this goal. Ultimately, this combined strategy of technology, people, and commitment will help our customers live sustainably, simply, and affordably. As Mary discussed earlier, Centrica is not the only organization thinking about the energy transition. And in fact, all of us need to act to achieve the aggressive global innovations that will be required to solve this global climate crisis. That being said, some of the solutions associated with the energy transition present their own unique challenges that Centrica is tackling. We can see there is progress towards introducing green electrons onto the grid. You can see here the projections by EIA of how much renewable generation will be introduced between now and 2050. This is excellent and an important step towards the energy transition. But let's zoom in on the United States to understand what this will look like in practice. Here you see on the left the current solar in yellow and wind in blue power plants in the US built today. Not surprisingly, the wind farms are located where it is windy, in a region that us energy folks call the Wind Belt, in the center of the country from the Dakotas to Texas. The solar is clearly built where there is excellent solar resource or where there is significant financial incentives in place to accelerate deployment of that technology. On the right, you see the US population density and the current grid overlay. Dense population indicates high energy consumption, which we in the energy industry call load. Dense population also indicates less land accessible or available for renewable energy generation, which can be quite land intensive. You can see significant transmission lines bringing energy from where it is produced, in the wind belt as an example, to where the load is. When you ask the US wind industry their number one wish to accelerate deployment of wind in the United States, they will tell you more transmission. While this is absolutely a component to the energy transition, it is also expensive, slow to build, and can be impactful to natural habitats, something we are actively attempting to protect with the energy transition. So, to state the obvious, we have a classic supply and demand mismatch across the country, and we anticipate this will be exacerbated as more renewables come online. Furthermore, traditional non-renewable power plants are typically dispatched on demand. Renewables are less controllable. You can't control when the wind will blow or the sun will shine. This issue is often referred to as the intermittency of renewables, which indicates that progress towards our renewables penetration goals introduces a challenge. This challenge is really the reason why Centrica Business Solutions exists, and we believe it is a challenge that brings with it great opportunity. So while all of that renewables generation gets built, a lot of it far from the demand on the system, there are other solutions that can be deployed today to help accelerate the energy transition. One solution is to build power generation and storage assets closer to where the load is. An example of this would be rooftop solar paired with battery storage. This solution decreases the load that needs to be transmitted from the centralized power plant to the site by generating solar power locally. If the solar generated exceeds the load of the facility at the time that the sun is shining, the solar is stored in a battery energy storage system. That stored electricity can be released to the grid at the place it is needed when the grid needs relief. In other words, in a time of intermittency, when centralized renewable generation is not producing, the energy in the storage system can be utilized at the local level. This is an example of a decentralized asset, which is highly valuable to the grid as it solves some of the complications I addressed on the former slide. As more decentralized assets get built, they can be aggregated to look like a centralized power plant, or what the industry has deemed a virtual power plant. Technology enables this aggregation. And once the decentralized energy resources are aggregated to become a power plant, they have access to the same revenue streams that power plants do. These value streams, which can be seen on the left of this graphic, are ways that the grid balances supply and demand. While I've been focusing on supply, an equally important piece of the equation is demand, which should not be overlooked. With smart controls and electrification of devices at facilities and homes, demand at the business and home levels can be controlled to respond to grid signals. We call this site flexibility. Now, with the introduction of technology, any customer, whether with renewable generation on site, by controlling their load, or with their fleet of electric vehicles, can participate in the energy market. You see these resources on the right of the graphic. Centrica's Distributed Energy Resource Management System, or DERMS platform, sits in between the energy market and the customers, providing gigawatts of flexibility to the grid, getting paid as a power plant, and distributing those payments back to our customers. Another use case for battery energy storage systems is a standalone system located near the load or within the distribution system. As a live example, we currently utilize a standalone battery in Belgium as a core pillar for our virtual power plant. Now, bear with me here. Imagine you are a plant manager at an industrial facility. You begin to think about which pieces of equipment are in your facility that can be controlled, how long it takes for them to react, for example. Perhaps you identify a compressor and that it can go from 100% to 0% load in 10 minutes. There happens to be a grid revenue stream that requires you to react in less than 60 seconds. So at first glance, your compressor cannot be utilized in that grid program, at least not on its own. This is where the battery comes in to help. The battery can react in milliseconds, so the 60-second notification time is easy for that asset. But the grid program requires that the asset shut down for an hour. That could be difficult for the battery if that needed to occur multiple times throughout the year. To explain why, we need to get into the chemistry for a second. The battery chemistry degrades as it charges and discharges, similar to your phone battery. And in simple terms, it is not good for the battery's life to get too low or to cycle, charge and discharge, too many times per year. So at first glance, perhaps the battery would not participate in this grid program either. But this is where the compressor can come in to help. The aggregated portfolio of assets, in this case, the battery and the compressor, can work together to earn revenue from the grid that alone they could not access. This is how. To hit the 60-second notification window, the battery will discharge to the grid, releasing energy to the grid when it is needed, and the compressor will shut down, eventually alleviating the grid need at that site. As the compressor goes from 100 to 0% over 10 minutes, the battery will slow its discharge to match the ramping of the compressor. Once the compressor shuts down completely after 10 minutes, the battery can stop discharging and remain at its steady state of charge. Once the grid event is over, the compressor can start back up and the battery can potentially begin to charge again. You can see on this graphic, the up and down assets on the ends are the compressor shutting down and turning on, and the battery is helping to react quickly to the grid event. Now imagine that aggregation at thousands of sites with multiple compressors or other devices at those site locations. You can see here a depiction of what our algorithms are doing to orchestrate that virtual power plant. In the middle, you see colored bars. These indicate over 24 hours of the day when those assets, such as compressors, can be shut down. The facility manager can input this information into our user portal. We then use predictive algorithms to anticipate when a grid event may occur, or put another way, when a value stream may be available. We also anticipate how much that value could be. Based on the availability of the assets and how quickly they can react as a portfolio, the assets are automatically bid into the energy market based on the probability of an event occurring and the value that that event might deliver. If the grid event occurs, the assets are automatically dispatched to react to the grid event. Data collected on site is utilized to settle in the energy market, which is how the customer gets paid for their flexibility. The combination of load, distributed energy resources, and a standalone battery system can deliver over 50% more value than if the battery was participating in the energy markets alone, or without the help of the compressor in the previous example. Centrica's technology and algorithms are accurate, deliver more value, and preserve the life of the battery. This has all been in action in the field since the summer of 2019. This platform, which enables the grid of the future and the energy transition, is powered by AWS. To get into a bit more detail on the distributed energy management system solution, let's walk through an example. Centrica's algorithms and platform identify that a grid imbalance may occur. When there is imbalance in the grid, it triggers a need for balance or flexibility. A signal is sent to Centrica from the grid. Centrica receives that signal and matches the load identified to achieve that balance. A signal is then sent to the assets that need to react to provide that decrease to the grid. That signal is then accepted or rejected at the facility level. AWS services underpin our artificial intelligence, communication, and cloud computing. Security is critical to the grid and our customers. AWS services that we use are GuardDuty and CloudWatch. As the world continues to digitize and electrify, more assets will be available to balance the grid. Automation has scale, and this grid flexibility at scale will enable the energy transition. Centrica is committed to be a net zero business by 2045 and to inspire other businesses and our customers along the way through technology, innovation, and people. Thank you.